Game of Thrones, a Telltale Games series, is a game by Telltale Games. Despite my scornful words about the genesis of this game, I actually don't think it's that bad. It does unfortunately have the task of following and intersecting with Tales from the Borderlands, effectively ending the 4-game streak of relative bangers from Telltale. The games are very different, of course, but nothing exists in a vacuum, especially the dust I should be hoovering in my room. It was the last game I played, so it's hard to not have it in mind. It also suffers from all the same issues of those games and later games, and I feel like I'm repeating myself again and again. Get used to that, if you aren't already. I do have some things to say about this one though, so I guess we'll just do that thing, and hey, if you're still watching, fucking hell. I think the most interesting thing about this game though is that it's proof that Game of Thrones really can't finish itself. Actually, that isn't even remotely the most interesting thing about the game, but I guess I wrote that. It does have the fortune of what I've deemed retroactive fan sentiment. With the show ending in a quite poor way, I think many would actually view this as a more satisfying experience because it's not so inconsistent. It also deviates from the main show's story, so it can be enjoyed as its own thing. Though it does also have the misfortune, god there's a lot of fortune and misfortune here, of coming out right in the middle of the decline of the show during season 4 and 5. In a weird way mirroring and almost prophesizing how the show itself would be structured going forward, namely with an abundance of sudden action to pad the runtime and a perceived lack of consequences or setup for pivotal character beats. Oh, and fast travel. Long gone, that's hard. Long gone are the political machinations. The political machinations. Oh, lad. Long gone are the political machinations, the slow burn storytelling. Well, when you put it like that, Game of Thrones actually seems like the perfect game for Telltale to do that. Why did I just start doing an accent? I am Scottish as well, why do I have to do an accent? Ah, the identity crisis, we're 2 minutes in. The game starts with a warning that I may experience issues playing on PS5, and this was the only game it happened with, but I didn't experience any issues playing on PS5. Though I will say that after finishing the game, I thought that maybe the ending had somehow been accidentally shuffled around somehow, and that the issue was relating to that, but we'll get to that. Also, that was mostly a joke, but hey, hello, goodbye, many a Starks, as the game actually opens at the Red Wedding, immediately planting itself in an iconic moment of the show, but from a different perspective, which is very clever indeed. It's a decent start. You see the Red Wedding actually happen, and everyone is just an unbelievable dick to everyone else because it's Game of Thrones. The only one who isn't a dick is Lord Forrester, who naturally dies instantly because he's a genuinely decent person, and this is Game of Thrones once more. He leaves his sword and has us swear to return it to our home of Ironwrath, also asking Garrett here to tell his uncle of the North Grove. Okay. I'm not familiar with the books, and I haven't watched the show in years, so I don't know if this Forrester family is canonical to the show, but they are described as being loyal bannermen to the Starks. I just realized that a quick Google search is all that it takes, but now I don't want to know. After Garrett witnesses his family's death and has a run-in with some soldiers, he returns to Ironwrath, and this place honestly looks tight as fuck. I love the big forest in the back with the castle out front, it looks awesome. Unfortunately, he's very quickly sent to the wall, his uncle Duncan worrying that his run-in with those Whitehill and Bolton men will have him tried for murder, with some people even suspecting that he had a role in Roderick's death, the eldest child of Lord Forrester who he was tasked with finding at the Red Wedding, only for him to already be dead. It seems obvious that there would be parallels with the Stark family of the show, and these Forresters are very similar. You haven't met most of them yet, but fuck it, why not? Roderick is Rob, Asher is John, what with them both being estranged, though you could easily swap Asher for Garrett, as he has been sent to the wall as John was. Mira is Sansa, also currently in King's Landing. Talia is Arya, Ethan is Bran, and little Ryan is... I genuinely can't remember that kid's name. Was it Rickon? I know there was a dick on.
Up the justified dicks. It's alright if it's justified. That's being a dick on.
That's gotta be dick on.
Throw in Garrett here, and he's basically their Theon, not being directly related to any of them. Their entire story is mostly to do with finding an army to help them in their war, but even with all the things they throw in there, it still can't help but feel like a Winterfell light. And I'm obviously getting something wrong here, but it does beg the question of why, if they're loyal bannermen to the Starks, they don't just ask the Starks for help.
Yes.
No, I'm asking for genuine help here.
I mean, there's still a few of them kicking about at that point, right? Little Ethan is then made Lord of Ironwrath in his father and older brother's absence, and you're mostly tasked with choosing a sentinel between Sir Royland, who is, I guess, the commander of their army, and Duncan, who is the castellan and also Garrett's uncle, if that means anything to you. I was immediately sure I'd pick Duncan, but after some investigating, Uncle Malcolm in the middle makes a great point that we're at war, apparently, so Sir Royland would be the better sentinel. As we just mentioned, Mira is in King's Landing, and she is currently in Lady Marjorie's squad. Or whatever you call it, squad. No. She's basically her handmaiden, and your goal for now is to try and curry favor to get Marjorie's help, as I guess the Foresters back home are in trouble.
Help!
She has a little run-in with a slave kid who has an interesting line about how the people in King's Landing just kind of blather on, especially when they don't know anyone is listening. It made me think that surely a Game of Thrones game would be far more interesting if it were from the perspective of someone like Tom here, this poor slave kid. Instead of just the glorified Starks again, why not shift the viewpoint to someone who isn't a royal? I guess I don't know what you would do with that, but that's not my job. I guess the only other thing I have to say about the episode is that little Lord Ethan gets killed by Ramsay Snow, who was introduced by flaying someone because I guess that's his entire personality now. The term Flanderization comes to mind, but I feel like that's probably fair to say about the show as well. Anywho, he kills little Lord Ethan regardless of what you do, which presents the immediate issue of prequels and having characters that you know won't die, so they have to invent new characters to die. But I'll come back to this specific scene in a later episode, since I have a pretty fucking sick idea for how it could have continued. We're introduced to Brother Asher in the next episode. Uncle Malcolm was sent to go and retrieve Asher, hopefully with an army of sellswords, of which he also is, so he's essentially a bounty hunter like many a character in the previous game. We also learn that Brother Roderick is alive.
Wow, I thought I was dead.
And there's almost a nice moment here with his father Gregor, the previous Lord Forester. Unfortunately, I have been trying to choose every single option presented to me to not miss anything, so instead of rolling him over, I looked at him, and the game proceeded to have his body flip over in an almost comedic way because of a rock in the path. It isn't funny, but I really found it funny. He just flopped over. Yeah, I just said that. I do like that the game will seemingly give you a slight change, but it was just executed in an odd way. Garrett makes it to the wall and has just the most frustrating exchange with these two characters, Finn and Cotter. Finn starts fucking with us for no reason. We then cover for them because they were blabbing, like Sarah in episode 3 of season 2 of The Walking Dead. I remember them things. Yeah, let me talk to you. As I grabbed a sword and it changed design, Cotter decides to steal Finn's little knife thing, and despite my trying to stay out of it, he says he's trusting me to not rat him out. Instantly, Finn and Cotter fight over it, and I get caught in the crossfire, having done nothing. All the dialogue choices once Finn starts throwing would have amounted to the same thing as well. Garrett then smirks at Cotter, showing the knife when I didn't even pick a side. This was unbelievably frustrating for me because it's not only the choices not mattering, it's the fact you can't bloody abstain at all. You have to pick a side, and I just wanted to stay out of it. I know that's maybe not the point, but I should still be allowed to do it. So far, I'm really not interested in Garrett or Mira's plot, but the other stuff is okay. Episode 2 is kind of just bang average. Episode 3 begins again with Asher. We're now being chased by the Lost Legion. There was an interesting moment where I tried to grab some gold instead of immediately going into a cave to hide, only for the Lost Legion to actually find us due to my greed. I imagine they'd have found us anyhow, but that was a cool interactive moment where I actually felt like I'd just organically messed up. Once in the cave, we run into Daenerys' dragon, who I wrote in my notes is named Dracarys, but I think his name is actually Drogon. I legit almost wrote dinosaur in my notes though, so clearly I'm very confused. I almost did it a second time when I saw Beska, Asher's sellsword friend, was trying to fight the thing. I saved Malcolm, with Beska being fairly peeved at my choice, but it didn't become an immediate thing like it often does. Luckily, she isn't too angry later on, which definitely surprised me for these Telltale Games. Mostly though, I just wanted to mention the dinosaur thing.
That's a dinosaur.
Yep. That's a dinosaur.
Cum Dragon's relentless.
I actually started to become more invested in Garrett and Mira's plots almost immediately, after Mira murders a guard to save the Cole slave boy, and Garrett is very suddenly visited by Duncan, who once again informs him to find the North Grove and basically desert the Night's Watch. So his entire reason for being there is just to immediately desert, which is actually quite intriguing. The reversal. Back at Ironwrath, we're just kind of spinning wheels and saying nothing until the scene ends, with Whitehill's son Griff taking over our Great Hall. He sounds like a bloody tannin or something. There's a choice to expel him or save Ryan, who was taken from us so he'd stay in line. But I didn't know what to pick because I was writing that note as they were talking, and also I don't care. I tossed a coin and expelled Griff. Oh no, the kid's gonna die. As you would want, I regretted the choice as soon as I made it, but there's a very distinct reason for why with this game. You see, the characters start chatting about how bad an idea it is after I've already made the fucking choice. So I went back and chose to save Ryan instead, since I expected everyone to act the same if I chose the other option. To my surprise, there was actually some nuance to the council here. You'd expect Sir Royland to be all for expelling Griff, being the war soldier guy, but he's actually the one who questions our decision to not save Ryan, while the far more civilized Duncan is in favour of expelling Griff. So I guess it's kind of interesting how it plays out. I just wish they would start talking about it before I made the choice. Like, you're my council, I want your input, thanks.
For the yes.
No, I'm asking for genuine help here. I know nothing.
But again, at least the scene doesn't play out exactly the same regardless of your choice. I didn't realize for the longest time that the reason Mira was trying to get Tyrion's help with the coin was so we could pay the sellswords. There's a W there, what am I supposed to say? I didn't realize for the longest time that the reason Mira was trying to get Tyrion's help with the coin was so we could pay the sellswords Asher is hopefully bringing back. Why is this the first time someone has actually explained that properly? It's also the first time I've explained it to you because I removed the initial explanation. Tyrion is also under the impression that aligning with Margaery's handmaiden will be useful, but the way we're going, it won't be at all because she's kinda pissed with us. Also, this is the wedding where Joffrey dies, and you'll recall that Tyrion is the one accused of the crime, so he's now powerless to help us, but his decree is still in his chambers. But once we get the decree, you're given the choice to burn it. I still don't understand why though. I think we're supposed to because Margaery doesn't want us to get involved as it will look bad for her, but since Tyrion was just arrested, it'll look even worse if it links back to us, hence why you'd burn it. Even though I thought the whole point of Tom Cole doing roof climbing was to ensure we had it in our possession, now that a Lord Morgryn who was previously partnered with Whitehill wants to ally with us. And I don't know who to trust, which I guess is good, but mostly I'm confused. Garrett has another visitor at the wall, but it's bloody Brit, the guy who killed his family. They get into it atop the wall, whether or not you want to, of course. It ultimately ends with Garrett killing Brit, and I had a thought here. The thought was that a fascinating thing Telltale could have done with a multiple protagonist game is to just kill one of them off. Not in an obviously scripted moment like Ethan, but as a result of a choice. The fact I say that like it's a novel concept. But not just any choice, the actual integral and constant dialogue choices, making the usually random, flavorful dialogue have some meaning. It doesn't come down to a binary choice that makes no difference but is presented as the end-all be-all. You instead actually have to evaluate your options and consider each piece of dialogue like it's your last. And then it may be. Think about it this way. Imagine you were somehow able to de-escalate things with Ramsay, so he spares Ethan, and because of that butterfly effect, Roderick actually does die, so you continue playing as Ethan instead. Roderick facilitates the exact same spot and storyline that Ethan would have, more or less, so the impact of Ethan's death is arguably less felt. And I don't think that's supposed to be some kind of commentary on how trivial kings and lords and that succession of rulers is. I'm pretty sure I just made that up outside of the game. There is the issue of Roderick's will they won't they betrothal, but that retrospectively just makes things feel even more linear and predetermined. It was always going to be Roderick's role, not Ethan's. Over the course of the game, I do like Roderick, but I could have easily liked Ethan as well. Or a more extreme example, what if when you're on the wall right here, you don't choose to fight Brit and Garrett is just killed, effectively dropping that entire plot? In Game of Thrones fashion, one of the plot lines potentially being axed, depending on your choice, would have been neat. I don't know that they ever actually do that so pointedly as well, so you'd have something of consequence over the main show. Game of Thrones' whole thing was foregoing and subverting the expected trajectory of a character's journey, with most of the traditionally heroic characters being snuffed out before their perceived time. Obviously that's a lot of work and effort, but it'd be kinda sick to have an entire storyline just gone from your playthrough because you fucked up. Straight up removing content would sure feel like a consequence, but I guess the only issue is that do people actually want that when they mention consequences? Do they want something that drastic? Or is it too far to where it's just kinda alienating, especially in a game that is really only meant to feel like a choice-based adventure as opposed to actually being one? I think it's fine, the games aren't particularly long, and it immediately offers replay value to see the entire storyline that you missed. But again, probably just another weird and wacky idea that isn't very practical, but hey, Hello. I think it would make sense. Telltale could still maintain some control over it because they just have to implement it in place of the usual game over screens. The storyline and content are there, they're just not letting you see it. It's a lot better than the game having to bend itself backwards to make its own choice make sense. As we see in episode 4's previously on, Garrett shown to have stabbed Britt in the chest. Once again, I don't know whose save this is, I don't know who this man is, I didn't do that. Despite that, and a moment that genuinely may be the most annoyed I got throughout all of these games, episode 4 was once again my favourite. Before that though, I really loved this sequence with Mira. She discovers that Lord Morgren was cut out of the Ironwood deal, hence his wanting to ally with us. His former partner, Lord Andros, is now dealing with Lyman Lannister, so we are tasked to spy on them. Lyman, lie, man. Is he lying? Does he know? Can we trust him? Him being Morgren, that is? I feel like I can't, some instinctual thing within me, probably just because I've played the game before. Meanwhile, Andros is the far more argumentative, outwardly evil person, so there's no charm to even be swept by. It's quite fun seeing Mira become a bit manipulative, as is the culture of King's Landing, as she tries to get information out of Lyman. It also involves Sarah's to-be-betrothed, a Lord Tarwick. Too many damn lords. He is suspicious of Sarah's background, since she's secretly a bastard, which is like the worst possible thing in this universe for some reason. We either tell him as such, or blatantly lie to him so that he will trade information regarding Lyman's troubled, milk-of-the-poppy addicted past. It is quite scandalous, and with this, we can find out that Andros had the same idea as Asher, to form an army of sellswords. It's a lot of good Game of Thrones flavoured or adjacent stuff. Lies and manipulation, using someone's vices against them, eavesdropping, just a lot of politicking, I suppose. I was starting to quite like Mira now. She was getting to be a little bit of a badass. I'll circle back to that at the end because, spoiler alert, I really fucked up Mira's storyline and I felt pretty bad about that. Also, Lord Tarwick reminded me very much of Wallace. The only other moment of the episode I want to mention comes from a particularly interesting scene. We're meeting with the Whitehills to discuss a would-be alliance where we make the Ironwood and Ludd will keep us alive and safe. But when he hears word, from us, that his son Griff is locked in our cellar, he threatens to kill Ryan. So, you either choose to accept his deal, beg for mercy, call his bluff, or attack. I chose to attack, as I had gotten very tired of this bickering and the game gave me the choice, which resulted in Ludd getting an arrow to the throat from Roderick's girlfriend's brother in charge of a task force, followed by many more. Then that brother, Arthur, gets an arrow to the eye, Asher's forbidden love Gwyn gets an arrow to the stomach, Duncan is stabbed in the back, and both Lady Forrester and Roderick are killed. Holy fucking shit, right? Wait, are they actually doing the thing I said before about just erasing a storyline? This is so fucking cool. It's like an actual Red Wedding moment. What now? A fucking game over screen. Fuck off. That is the most blatant and outrageous example I have ever seen of this illusion of choice. So much so that I capitalized in the script. Why even give me the choice? Like, why am I here? Genuinely felt like such a robbery. That is so uncool. Way to ruin a good scene in the best episode so far. That's so fucking lame. You can't do that shit in a Game of Thrones game. No siree Bob. I don't get pissy about a lot of things, but that is genuinely aggravating as all hell. Fuck. And then I just kept on coming back every few minutes to type more obscenities. I was so upset.
This was a hate crime.
Yeah, it was.
This was a hate crime.
Yeah, it was.
This was despicable. It's disgusting. It's disgraceful.
Disgusting.
I was furious, mate.
Now, to be fair, the fact that we, and not Ryan weirdly enough, all die many a deaths is a bit of a dead giveaway. But why does it go on for so long? It's genuinely presented in a way where, at least for a moment, it felt like the game was just going to continue. It was such a cool moment to see, but it contextually feels like an Easter egg, this extended game over screen that you're not supposed to see. It even has a unique game over title, Vala Mogulis, which of course means all men must die. But actually no. Thing about Easter eggs though, is that you don't find them by playing the game as it is intended, you find them by going off the beaten path. And this path has been beaten so thoroughly. Oh, yeah. I said it. What? What did I say? The only thing I can say to defend it is that Gwyn escorts you into the room, but prior to it shows you a family tapestry, and I think you're supposed to remember that Ludd values a Whitehill regardless of how valuable they are, so he'd have never killed Ryan if it meant Griff would then be killed. Though it was kind of hard for me to remember all that when he looks like fucking Donald Trump for some reason. I have a feeling this was intentional given 2016. So after I'd calmed down,
A few inches later.
I went back and called his bluff, because that was slightly rebellious, which worked this time. Hooray! I could feel like I had defied the rigid parameters of these choices that are handed to me by a small percentage, instead of just being able to do that of my own volition. I really don't like exaggerating or misrepresenting scenes that I talk about to make out like my reaction to it is justified when in reality it isn't that bad. Like people who think Ray is a Mary Sue.
Oh, shut up.
So you won't see many moments like this for me in general, but this one genuinely is as explained. Like, it's wild to me. And even if it wasn't, my reaction to it was a pretty heated gamer moment. So I guess it'd be worth mentioning anyhow. I'm almost certain my whole hypothesis beforehand was inspired by this moment. It is just baffling to witness in real time. The game already began at the Red Wedding, so it's kind of fitting that there is a feigned attempt from Telltale to spin their own shit, only to not actually do anything with it.
I love the idea as well. I really do. We saw it teased, loved the tease, got really excited. And so, but I think it's like, play with us a bit more.
Yeah.
But here's a little Easter egg of my own for you. If you like my idea of a storyline being axed, all you have to do is initiate this scene, and then turn the bastard game off. The end. I have basically nothing proper to say about episode 5 besides some minor things that I noticed. It dawned on me that we may end the game with no army at our side, mainly due to a letter. I'll return to that. Also, because Ramsey suddenly has Arthur Glenmore tied up and cut to pieces, once again showcasing his expressionist art, so there goes our bloody task force. He decides to leave the conflict, and whichever of the houses are left standing, well, they win. They stand. This is all because I supposedly disobeyed him, even though I showed Griff mercy like he asked. It even says it in the ending choices, so like, allow me. Then you're given the choice to stab Ramsey. Annoyingly, I didn't do it. Again, it's pretty obvious the game isn't going to let you do that, but you might as well see how they write themselves out of it, if at all. But at this point, the choices were becoming burdensome and downright flagrant. I was almost rolling my eyes at every decision.
Would you rather?
Oh, fuck.
Otherwise, I don't know. In a previous episode, Roderick meets with Gwyn, and she reveals that there is a traitor in our council, Duncan being the culprit. His reasoning for doing so is along the same weak lines of what Ramsey said about No Mercy 2008, with Roderick only bringing violence and that it will lead to the destruction of House Forrester. I'm guessing he says this because I chose Sir Royland as my sentinel, but I've been fairly merciful, I'd say. But you know, don't have a say, do I? Also, I distinctly recall choosing Duncan as my sentinel years ago, so I'm pretty sure he's the traitor no matter who you pick, which doesn't make sense. I mean, it wouldn't make sense the other way either. None of it makes sense or matters. It kind of just feels like something that would happen in the show, so we gotta do it here, I guess. Never mind, it seems that Royland is the traitor if you make Duncan sentinel. That seems pretty obvious, I guess I just remembered it wrong. Anyway, the traitor thing also needs to happen because Duncan lets Griff escape so that Lud wouldn't ambush us at the meet with Asher, finally arriving after some weeks. But it's all in the same episode, so it kind of feels like he just appears suddenly. In fact, it's about 14 minutes exactly from when he gets on the boat and when he arrives. And then that ambush happens anyway. Thanks, Duncunt. And you have to decide if Roderick or Asher dies, with the other escaping. I kept Asher alive, even though I prefer Roderick at this point, but I guess that just made more sense for some reason. So now Asher is the new lord with his sellsword army. I guess that removes the concern of Asher's soldiers not obeying Roderick, since Asher is their boy. Even though Asher fundamentally disregarded and disrespected their entire fighting tradition by not murdering the guy he beat, therefore denying Song of Blood a worthy death, but whatever. I mean, that's a stupid tradition anyhow, but I said whatever. It does present an interesting choice though, as I'm fairly certain the 6th and final episode can be pretty different depending on how you played. So maybe you save Roderick and the sellswords decide that they don't want to fight for him, since they of course used to be slaves and he would seem like a master to these savages who fight for the fun of it. Most likely they will just forget that they have brains and follow him.
He's now dead. Rest in peace.
Episode 6 starts in a kind of dumb way. Garrett, Sylvie, and Cotter, who is in a bad way, happen upon the North Grove by total accident. Oh yeah, they've gone past the wall, found Cotter's wildling sister, and Finn has even died. Well, how'd they get into that pickle? They cross this ice lake and run into an ice cave after being chased by an ice bear. That on its own is ice fine, but it's then revealed that someone in the North Grove is a weir, like Bran, but I wrote Bram for some reason. So he was controlling the polar bears, I presumed to lead us here, but no, it's just another dickhead in a long line of dickheads for no real reason, and they now have us at Spear Point. Why did you blatantly lead us to your secret hidden Grove of the North, fella? I guess he was trying to get us to fall in the lake. Still makes more sense than Luke's death, I suppose. It's also really becoming apparent how familiar and stiff these animations are, but that will remain a constant for pretty much ever. This one part here absolutely killed me. The expressions and range of emotion in just a few seconds from shock, to anger to real shit. Beautiful. I don't know if I'll care to mention it later, but they're Lord Forrester's bastard children, which is like the inverse of Jon Snow, so that's something. Guess he wasn't all that good, huh? The guy is called Jacera, and he believes that Garrett's arrival is to bring them back, while his sister, whose name I don't remember, is more concerned with using blood magic to brainwash their people, adamant to continue protecting the North Grove. From who? I really fucked over Mira, again. Mira's fate may honestly be the most cruel and unfortunate of all the Forrester clan, as she is either sentenced to death or sentenced to being a glorified prisoner of Lord Morgren, who asks for her hand in marriage and the termination of her name and ancestral home, which would presumably make him liable to become Lord of Ironrath, or that's at least how I understood it. Last time, Mira died. This time, Mira survived with Morgren, but it meant we had to pin our crime onto the cool boy Tom, even witnessing his removal of head. By the end of the game, I was pretty unhappy with Mira's outcome, but I realized that it was entirely my fault. I wrote something along the lines of, Mira's whole manipulation arc didn't come to much, before realizing that it's because I didn't actually commit to it. Like, I had every opportunity and every chance and every choice to screw over Sarah, who was already ratting me out, to save her own skin. Or how about the letter that you could have forged to be from Lady Marjorie in episode 2, which would have influenced the Glenmores to align with Roderick in Ironrath? Who are the Glenmores? Well, Arthur Glenmore was the leader of that task force, and Elena Glenmore was already to be betrothed to Roderick before some shenanigans that this letter could have seemingly undone. The shenanigans involved Whitehill forcing Roderick to kiss his ring as a show of respect, with Elena's father calling off their alliance and marriage, so the letter would have probably helped a ton, presuming the choices actually matter now. In episode 5, Cersei takes interest in Mira's recent cunningness, if that's a word, and will offer to help with Lord Andros if we talk to Tyrion for her and find out who his fighter will be. Instead, I just told Tyrion that that's exactly what I was doing here, blowing my cover and the chance of potentially helping my family. Then in episode 6, as mentioned, you can blame Sarah solely for getting Mira into the party in episode 4, where she is manipulating Lyra Lannister. Marjorie is not happy with Mira in this moment, and doing so puts Sarah at risk for helping us. But instead, I just didn't do that. It's like the game offered me an interesting path, and I just refused to take it, so Mira ended up in a really bad spot, and I'm really curious if it could have gone better for her. If so, that's pretty great. I really like that the only way to get a good ending for her is to be a bad person. That feels so true to the spirit of the show and King's Landing. So, to clarify, I'm not criticizing the game for not delivering on this character change in Mira, rather I'm criticizing myself for not letting the game do it when I had ample and continued opportunities too. In other words, I felt like my choices had negatively impacted on the character and story in a way that mattered and changed my experience. At least the other Forresters were mostly together. Mira was all on her own in a foreign land with the only person she could trust dying at her forced hand. Damn. Like in a lot of these games, I can't confirm if it would actually matter, but it felt like it did, and that's the goal. As mentioned, it seems that the final episode can be fairly different depending on the choices that lead up to it, so my entire lapse in memory of the episode makes sense, as it's possible I had an entirely different experience. Long story short, the Whitehills have technically won the war as Lord Roderick has already been killed, which is a very nice and devious little detail, of course pertaining to Ramsay's stipulations. So, Asher and them lot decide to either stage an ambush on Whitehill or poison him, which feels fairly dishonorable in a good way. Gwyn will appear to try and persuade Asher away from what she calls an obvious ambush, which reduced me once again to my lemon-like state when Sir Royland asks to confirm the plan.
Oh, those are the only two options he has. He does neither.
Oh, right.
I'm indecisive. I can't decide.
Either way, the ambush actually goes really fucking wrong. Like, horrendously wrong. Ludd gets away almost immediately, and I don't think we even kill him, which was the entire goal. Asher kills Griff, but then Gwyff stabs Asher in the back for doing so. Then Ironrath is overrun by Whitehill's men, Lady Forrester dies, Sir Royland barely survives as he manages to get Asher out of Ironrath. I gotta give props, this battle was pretty good, pretty long, and it went really fucking bad for us. We completely failed. It did not work at all, and it didn't even lead to a game over screen because it's the final episode and bad things can happen now. And yeah, I can totally imagine the many different ways that even this battle would play out depending on who you saved and what you chose and you and what army, so that's pretty neat. The only weird thing about it is that after Asher escapes, we cut back to Garrett and them lot at the North Grove, now with the choice to either leave or stay. I guess it's just a little strange to see all that happen and then have the choice, like, Surely no one is going to stay after witnessing that. I don't get why we're given the hindsight that Garrett, who in-universe is making the choice, doesn't get. It's a little jarring to me, and I think it could have been a far better gut punch if we made this choice right before the battle commenced, so you're just on tenterhooks waiting to see how the battle goes, and then you feel like shit if you chose to stay. But I chose to leave, of course, so I guess Garrett and the Blood Pact will show up in a few months, and Mira and Lord Morgren will be in charge. I love that, by the way. I say it like a joke because it's such a villain thing to make a claim like that, like somehow Morgren is going to take over Ironrath, but after what happened, shit, he actually could, and that's kind of an awesome implication to leave on. Like, who's in charge of the joint now? Man could just waltz in. And that's basically the end of the game, with your choices being narrated by the television characters. It's kind of funny the way this plays out, actually. To me, it almost read as a way of hand-waving why the Forresters are never mentioned throughout the show, by having the TV characters talk about them in a dismissive way. From the sounds of it, the Forresters were so bloody pathetic and awful, the main characters vowed to never speak of them again because they just sucked so much. Like, they're just slewing me for my bad choices, and it was really funny in that context because I actually did feel like I fucked it up. And then something strange happened. A post-credit scene. The fact there's a post-credit scene isn't totally surprising, though it is a bit to see Duncan back to save Asher after what happened. I guess he just didn't like Roderick, though considering Asher just planned and failed a violent ambush that seemingly led to Ironrath being overtaken. Well anyway, maybe he felt bad for basically causing Roderick's death via portcullis. The real kicker is the following post-credit scene, where we see Asher's friend Beska riding on a horse with Ryan, having escaped Ironrath. The camera focuses in on Beska, determined, before panning down to a scared Ryan, whose expression turns seemingly to resolve.
Let's just see what it... Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, no, no. Carry on. Oh, is that the end of it?
That's the closer! And that's the ending, see ya. What the fuck was that? What on earth was that supposed to mean? Ryan has barely been in the game, I don't even know if I'd noticed them taking off during the battle, and then it cuts to that. And that's your ending cliffhanger. What are we hanging on here, the last living Forrester? Because he isn't, like. I had a big whinge about this in my notes, saying that it's an ending that could almost ruin the game because it was so random. I don't know if I feel that way now, but I was utterly deflated that not only did they tease a second season, which I guess in and of itself was kind of inevitable, but that it ended on that scene. This is why I made the funny joke earlier about the scenes being in a wrong order. This genuinely felt like it was a bug, it being the final shot. I don't even know why it's so awful, but the knowledge and hindsight of never getting a second season, with that being the ending shot, it's just filthy.
Quite filthy.
Oh, Joel, wrapping it all up like a season finale.
It's a callback.
The game ending in such a bleak and harsh way was fitting, but this was just so confusing and jarring to me. But I will say this, the show's ending is awful and unsatisfying in a particularly rushed and unenthused way, where this game's ending is kind of awful in an interesting way, like, it really rubbed me the wrong way and I still don't know why. It's just such a nothing ending, it was so deflating and sudden. After a quick watch of all the alternate paths from episode 6, I was hit with a memory of my playthrough ending with Roderick being alive, and in this scenario, you don't plan an ambush or poison. Side note, it also seems like the ambush with Asher happens no matter what, which is a little disappointing if I'm honest. Instead, you go and directly save Ryan, decapitating either Griff or Ludd in the process, and I believe that's what leads to this ending with Beska and Ryan, since Beska is right alongside Roderick during his ending. Also, it turns out that Mira has a shit end no matter what. Even if you lie to Butter and blame it all on Sarah, you're still dismissed from her service. Oh come on man, they get so close every time and I'm always having to rescind my praise. Admittedly, these games are only meant to be played through the one time, but if you have to ignore or disqualify a second playthrough just to maintain some level of feigned praise, that's kinda shitty. I guess these games work a lot better when you don't try and see every angle of them, instead letting it just fade from your memory, hoping that there's a better ending. I'm not saying it isn't Game of Thrones-esque to have bad endings for some characters no matter what, but why is it specifically Mira that feels so slighted? I seriously doubt if you did all the mischievous and bad choices, it would make a difference as well. Oh well, I guess you can't out-cunt Cunt's Landing. The game ultimately feels like if the show had changed hands around season 3 or so, with all these new characters and storylines being introduced, the actual story being completely forgotten about. Given the lack of source material to adapt from, I guess that's kind of what happened at some point. It just doesn't feel like its own genuine expansion or adaptation like a Tales from the Borderlands did. It's less a Telltale spin on an established thing, and more Telltale just trying to make Game of Thrones, which sounds obvious and like it should be the goal, but I don't know if that's really what works for them. It kind of just does every Game of Thrones adjacent thing that you'd expect, and I guess that's fine, again, but it's not really to the game's benefit when the most exciting moments are followed by game over death screens. I didn't finish the sentence there originally, so I guess the game just isn't very memorable. It doesn't give me anything to hold on to. Once again though, yeah, it's alright. Not nearly Telltale's worst. There was definitely kind of a concerted attempt with regard to the choices, but I don't think it delivered. And that's kind of the inherent issue with demanding choices have branching and consequential effect. The writing for this game especially is already so scattered, so trying to also work in a bunch of branching options would have been more overwhelming than usual, even if they weren't concurrently making a different game. It's something The Walking Dead didn't have to worry about. The choices were ultimately superfluous to the actual story, so it allowed them to tell the story with the vision always in mind, and that could be the entire focus. I feel like following Game of Thrones, Telltale try to do a bit of both, and it never really works out because they're just not committing fully to their story or choices. Most of the time, I'd rather they just didn't bother and went back to the Walking Dead style. But of course, that game was largely helped by being totally new and fresh and exciting. But also, it was just a really damn good game, and ultimately I think that's more judicious than being a well-timed game in terms of release and how much tolerance people have for these games now. Anyway, here's Minecraft Story Mode. Okay. So yeah, I thought it'd be funnier if the guitar was out of tune. Luckily, it was already out of a tune. Out of a tune? Okay. That's enough. I didn't say that's analysis once, oh no! That's Wonderwall.